the a little bit of the background, nothing is started from whole cloth. You can't make light bulbs until you got electricity. You can't have electricity until you got wires. And so we built on what has gone before. Medicine has developed over the years. In the past, very few people could read, and the language, written language, is not all that old. So that people that practice medicine, whatever, whether they were called witch doctors or shaman, learn from their predecessor, and anything they picked up that was new had to be passed down verbally to the next guy. So we again have gone very slowly. Let me see if I can change slides. There we go. Okay. Uh, uh, oops. What I'd like to do in this presentation is talk about evidence-based medicine, how to evaluate the information that you get, how to judge whether what you're hearing is useful and truly valid, and talk about a little bit about the numbers needed to treat. And inherent in that is what is the half-life of the medication. So if it's doesn't last but a few hours and you're supposed to take it 3 times a day, or does it last a month and even though you're taking it daily? And basically, how do you make it useful to you, because you're one of the masses? And last but not least, websites that you can go that will help you research what it is you're particularly interested in. The general public uh, has been a recipient of this medical information and medical care. What's disappearing in our culture is extended family, because when I was growing up, grandma was a source of a great deal of the medical information. Don't worry about it, the kid's fever will go away. Get excited about it. Oh, it'll heal. The blood will stop, hold pressure on it, and that kind of thing. Uh, a good example is the picture of the doctor sitting by the bedside with his chin on his hand looking at the child that had pneumonia, because there wasn't anything else he could do. The kid was going to get well or die in spite of what he did or thought about it. Treatment also was driven by culture, again, part of the communication problem. Now we got more information and we know what to do with. We have infomercials that are bombarding us with this medicine will take care of whatever's wrong with you. But oh, by the way, it can kill you too. And that's the last part of the information that they give you, and it's mandated by the government that if you're going to tell them how good it is, you got to tell them that it's bad for you. Okay, now we got to fellow workers. When I was in working for the government and for the airlines, we they would we had a clinic and they would come in and pick up over the counter medication, and we decided we were going to not have somebody dole it out, that we just put it out there. And they went through about $5,000 worth of over the counter medication, which is a huge volume, and they suddenly stopped, and I figured their desk drawer was full, so they didn't need any more. And right now, also very useful is the internet. The problem is in all presentations, there's very much information, and some of it's good and some of it's not. And then now we get to the healthcare provider, which include the chiropractic, acupuncturist, the DO, the MD, the naturopath, and the homeopath. And we can talk about that if there's any questions about it. Okay, what? How do you decide whatever treatment you're doing is valid? Historically, for a long, long time, as I said before, it was communication by verbal. One person would tell another person. The shaman or the healer had what he did, and he learned from other people in the same environment. And so basically it was always that way. And now, then we began to change it by observation, but there was many, many years where nothing was really changed because the gurus were the only people that were doing anything particularly. Nobody paid any attention to anybody else. Now we're getting a lot of stuff, particularly on the internet. On this is a wonderful stuff. At one time, there was a series of articles and sales pitches on the internet and on TV where the water that you were supposed to buy from them was at the bottom of the glacier, and so it was hundreds and hundreds of years old, and obviously it wasn't contaminated by the dust that was in the air at the present time. As we progressed and people began to read and write, then the transmission of knowledge was much faster. Then Koch came up with these postulates, and for the first time, we begin to have an explanation for diseases. Before, it was the vapors, and then they worked to figure out how to get rid of the vapors. Koch came along and says, if this is present in all people who have the disease, then it's probably the cause of the disease. Then he looked at it the other way. People that had that disease had to have that bacteria there in order to be caused, and they used tuberculosis for that. Then they came up with experimentation, which meant that they were giving people or animals the bacteria exposure, or they checked to see if they were doing it to see if they in fact developed the disease. Evidence-based medicine is where they take all the information that is available, look at it to see if it, in fact, that we're all talking about the same thing, and then taking it and applying it to the patient to see if it's useful to them and to the provider. Okay, the various studies that have been going on in the past and even now, historically, what has gone on, then a lot of it on the internet particularly is that everybody, we have the testimonials of how wonderful this treatment was. We don't know whether that's one person or hundreds of people, but it's very persuasive. Then now we have observation, and this is early on how the advances in medicine were going. Somebody was very clever and would notice certain things. The one story that I remember most vividly is the story of the lady in the community who could treat heart failure that nobody else could do. And what she was doing was giving them a tea that had equivalent of digitalis in it, and so the heart rate would be much more effective and slower so that they got out of failure. Then the formal studies started, and they're listed in the strength that they occur. First ones are just random. We give a bunch of people something and they get better or don't get better, or they do well or they get side effects from it. Then we have the random control where the experimenter controls who gets what, and they keep track of it. The problem is with that one is that if I think the medication is good, then I give it to my friends. If I don't know whether the placebo, I don't know whether it's not any good or not, you get it because I don't like you particularly. And also, you're prejudiced by how I present the medication. This is wonderful. You really ought to take it. It's going to be good for you. That's a sales pitch, and that comes into the uncontrollable part of it. The most powerful studies are when they're random, controlled, and double blind. So I, as a provider of the medication, don't have a clue what it is. It's a number on the container, and all the containers look alike, and I don't know what the numbers mean, so that I can't prejudice the people that are getting it. Okay, what do you need to look for when you're looking at a study is what you want to do is how big is the study, and kind of get a feeling for how common is it. So if it's the study needs to be a certain size or it's meaningless. And to calculate the size needed takes a little bit of math and a little bit of background information, and we won't cover that particularly. But what you're interested in is what are the two groups, the control group and the treatment group? Are they anything like you? And are they about the same size? And then you were looking for how many people drop out of the study, both in the control and in the treatment side, which gives you some kind of idea of the problem of the medication and how the study is set up. Then you look at the side effects, and most drug inserts that you get when they give you the medication list all the side effects and the percentage of people with the drug and people with the side effects. I mean, sorry, the placebo have the same side effects. And it's interesting, people taking a placebo get rashes and headaches and nausea and vomiting and so forth, as well as the people getting the active drug. The confidence level is a statistical terminology in which they're trying to say we feel certain within this range that we're right, and plus or minus whatever. So they say our confidence level is 98% plus or minus 5. That means that at least plus or minus 5 of what we say is wrong. Then you need to look, do the conclusions fit the test? Sometimes they do a test, and remember that in order to be an expert or a standard bearer, then you have to publish. So sometimes they will really work hard to make it look good so somebody with a peer review will accept it. And it really, when you read it, you wonder what's going on. Okay. All right. Let's suppose we're taking a random test. You go to the fair and they're going to do a test for diabetes. And the test is 98% accurate, which means everybody that has diabetes, 98% of them will be positive with the test. Now you have a 98% sensitivity, meaning that if you're trying to figure out if people had the disease, at 98% of the people, you'll get the right results. And the occurrence in the population is 10%. I mean, I picked diabetes on purpose because that's about the occurrence in the population. And you get a positive test. You have a 50-50 chance that you have the disease, but you have a 50-50 chance that you don't. The moral of that story is don't let them treat the lab work. If the lab work doesn't fit with what's going on, make them do it again. Okay. Now, how do we go from the test of thousands to me as an individual? We're all different. Some people metabolize a drug instead of 4 hours, metabolize it in 12 hours. Or they metabolize it in 2 hours, and it's supposed to last 4 hours, and I get rid of it in my body in 2 hours. We're all different. We're also in a different environment, and we're eating different foods. Other things are going on. Now, I'm a couch potato, and you run 4 miles a day. Then we have drug effects that are different in each different individual. And last but not least is the placebo effect. We've all kissed the kids boo-boo and they stop crying and go out and they're still oozing and skin is scraped, but they're okay now. And it's very, very powerful. They've done studies to find out if people like library experience, for instance, and some people like it and some people don't, and they set up an experiment where one group, the librarian touched them, whether they touched them when they were handing them the book or just touched them somehow or other during the process of checking them out. And the people that got touched had a pleasant experience. The people that didn't think much of the experience. Okay, these are known things. Now, how about all the unknowns? Again, what did I eat for breakfast? Do I have asthma? Do I have kidney problems? Am I on dialysis? These are all things very difficult to control for. I've got live in a family with my spouse and 3 kids, and so I eat different than if I'm a bachelor on the road. Okay, part of the problems with EBM is evidence-based medicine is one is they have to be published. This takes a while. Normally the time from completing the experiment to the time it shows up in medical literature is something like 4 years. So now this is 4 years old. Part of the delay is that if you're a medical editor, then you have it reviewed by peers who know what it is. They're experts in this area. They take their time about doing it, send it back for revision, and it gets revised and then eventually accepted for publication. Also, there needs to be funding to do the experiment. And this can be gotten more and more expensive. When I was in school, when the control group was healthy volunteers, that usually meant medical students, because medical students will do anything for money. When I was in school, they would pay you 50 cents an hour if you swallowed a balloon like before you took a drug. For another 50 cents an hour, they would insert a balloon in your rectum. And I decided that there was a limit to what I'd do for money. And so I stopped being the healthy volunteer. And also somebody has to think the end results are valuable, otherwise it doesn't get published. Not so obvious is the fact that the way we do studies is that we ask a question. We think, okay, I'm going to give you sassafras tea, and I think sassafras tea will keep the bugs from biting you. So I get you, the volunteer, and sassafras tea, and then I get the bugs, and that may not be why the bugs don't bite you, but I didn't ask the right question. That's not what I'm getting the answer. And last but not least, it has to be published or nobody can read it. This has all kind of disappeared with the internet. I can come up and do a study and I can publish it so it's widely available. And I don't have to go through a peer review, and the people reading it can decide, is it worthwhile? Also, the audience is very diverse, so that if I'm doing an article to pediatricians and they don't particularly care, but the forest ranger who has that problem will be very interested in it. Okay, now the number needed to treat is how many people had to be treated in the study before there was an event. And we'll talk about it in specific, but here's the formula so you can look at it. Let's take a real event and talk about that. In the statin studies, they treated 660 people for 5 years before they prevented one event. And the event was defined in that study as some sort of cardiovascular event, a stroke, a heart attack, embolus, something like that. The website below gives you a way to work out the numbers on the number needed to treat. Okay, what else do you need to know? Again, the size of the study. Are you similar to the two different groups? Because they set a study up and they eliminate people. And let's suppose they've eliminated all the people with a previous stroke and you had a stroke, but you're doing okay now. Well, you don't fit this group. Or they eliminate all the people over 65. Or in the past, it used to be a problem getting women in the group, so they were heavily weighted towards men, and so that if you were a woman, the group really didn't fit you at all. And again, the number that dropped out. Okay, now how do you get involved in actively taking part in your health care? One is you get involved. Remember, he goes home or she goes home at night and she doesn't have the aches and pains that you got. And she doesn't have to worry about taking the medicine and that kind of thing. So you need to be a active participant, ask questions. And if they don't want to talk to you, it's time to go someplace else because you're paying them good money to work with you. Again, ask the question, does this occur in the family? And right now, the fact that your mother and your sisters have breast cancer makes you very susceptible to perhaps you're having a problem. And as we learn more, now they've discovered a gene that seems to be related to breast cancer. I'm sure there's other things that go along with it as well. Also, what else are you doing? Are you being physically active? That seems to be the most potent health protector is just being physically active. Doesn't make any difference whatever your problem is, whether it's diabetes or heart failure. If you're physically active, you do much better than other people. And so what do you think your personal risk is? If you're taking 10 different medicines and you got to decide whether you're going to buy the pills or eat, you might take a good hard look at am I at a risk? As a male, I don't have to worry about breast cancer. It does occur, but it's such an infinitesimal number, it isn't worth it. So then you decide, is it worth it? Do I want to take this medicine for 6 years or 5 years to prevent one event and I don't really feel like I'm at risk? And what happens if I do nothing? Does this mean I'm doomed to have the stroke or doomed to develop diabetes because I don't do anything? Not necessarily. There's a formula that says, the number needed to harm, and it's kind of the opposite side of the number needed to treat. What happens if you have two groups of people, one gets the treatment and one don't? How many people have to be exposed before they get the problem? Okay, let's talk about the websites that are available. First thing, your health directives or the advanced directive. They're worthless if they're in the drawer. If you go to the hospital and your advanced directives don't go with you, it doesn't make any difference if you can't communicate. They're not going to go along with anything. They're going to do whatever it is that says they'll do. So, like they'll keep you alive, or anyway, they'll keep you on a machine so you're warm and your heart's beating for years before somebody decides, we've decided that you're dead, and we all agree on or most of us agree on what that means. Then you need to look at the search engines because the internet is so large that it's difficult to figure out, is this group really valid? There's health information sites, particularly in a given area, as well as alternative medicines in what we do. Now we have government agencies that control a lot of this information, and so it's nice for you to go to them and find out how they make their rules and what makes them yes or no. And then a tremendous amount of free patient information. One of the group sites is osteoporosis treatment, and there's a lot of that. How good is it? What if I decide not to do it? What are the side effects? How long do I have to take it before there is a change? And how often should I test to find out if there is a change? Okay, alternative medicine is becoming more and more popular because there's information about food, diet, and supplements that are being accumulated and show great promise. Remember that if I'm a drug company and I'm giving you, I want to find out if garlic is any good, I can't patent garlic. So that I really don't want to invest $100,000 to find out garlic works or doesn't work. And let me jump, because I want to change the site just a little bit. As you know, Viagra was started off, they were testing for medicine for controlling of hypertension, and they had all these volunteers that they were giving it. They wanted to stop. It wasn't working worth the tube. And they decided that, well, okay, we're going to stop it. They tried to get all the people that they were giving the medication to stop it, and they weren't going to give it anymore. And there was a big hue and cry. And it took them quite a while to figure out, why didn't these people want to stop the medication? And the side effects was an erection, and which meant active sex was possible. And that was a completely unexpected side effect. Again, what questions are you asking? And that started them on the hunt for others, because we don't want somebody to have an exclusive. Okay, there is a way to find out what the cost and a fair price in the area. If you're covered by insurance, they have an agreement with usually a provider, so that's not much of a choice. But suppose you don't have insurance. The difference in, say, an MRI varies all the way from $130 to $6,000. Same study, just different location. Then there's information about your doctor. It came as a real shock to me when I started practicing medicine that everybody didn't love me. But I finally reconciled to the fact that, let's face it, I couldn't please everybody and everybody couldn't please me. So we tend to go along with, the guy has a bunch of diplomas on the wall, he must be good. And besides that, he's charming. Really doesn't fit. And one of my things when I was in practice in the government was to evaluate physicians. And I was amazed at the wide variety of people that thought their doctor was wonderful. I had one guy that really amazed me. He had his uniform out in the waiting room, and he had a tick where he licked his lips constantly, and he didn't shave, and he was fat, sweaty, and had trouble talking, and yet his patients thought he was wonderful. So you can't go by appearances. Next is information on hospital performance. And when you go in the hospital, you don't have, without this kind of information, you have no idea whether you're in the right place or not. And then again, contact for possible help with the cost of medication. Veterans health benefits. If you're a veteran, you can get your drugs through the VA. All you have to do is fill out a form and send it in. Buying drugs in Canada. The problem with buying drugs out of the U.S. Now, the drugs that you buy at the corner drugstore may be made the same place that you get them from Canada. And a lot of drugs are made in India, but you don't know that. And you don't know what the quality control is. Years ago, again, when I first started practicing medicine, City of New York was such a big customer that they would buy drugs and they would test them. And if they met the standards and they retest them periodically, then they would buy the drugs from this company, and they published who they bought their drugs from, which meant that in the small town I was in, that I could be comfortable if I ordered these drugs that they were actually, in fact, what the bottle said. Digress a minute. Anything that's called a supplement is absolutely no control. Nobody says what's in it. Nobody checks to see what it is. And it can be anything. It can be grass shavings in it, and they can call it whatever they wanted to. And they could have all kinds of testimonies of how wonderful it was. Interesting, the state of California just passed a law that if you're going to sell marijuana, you got to tell them what's in it. And they've got to measure the THC, which means that a lot of these cannabis clinics or stores are going to have a lot of trouble because the testing is expensive, and so you're going to have a huge batch in order to make it worthwhile to test it. So they're trying to figure out what the Sam Hill would do now. So you and I ought to start a lab where we test the cannabis. Okay, then we talk about the interactions of various medications that interact with calcium, and there's a long list. And if you're not taking any of those medicines, you don't care. Then there's interaction with grapefruit juice. Grapefruit juice seems to have a 24-hour effect. So if I drink grapefruit juice for breakfast and I take something at noon, it's going to interact with it. And most of them don't enhance the absorption, they decrease the absorption in effect. Okay, let me kind of shoot from the hip the difference and how different we are. I had two female patients in the hospital, and they were both in failure, and they kept trying to get them in failure. One of the problems was that one would get violently ill every time they gave her the digitalis that she needed to get out of failure, and the other one, nothing would happen. It turned out that the one that was very sensitive worked out that she would take a new pill, lick it, and throw the rest of it away, and that was the exact optimum dose. And the other lady, I gave it to her enough to should have killed her, and it worked just fine. She was stable, and she took it daily, almost lethal dose, and that kept her in good control. So we are that different, and unfortunately, we can't look in the mirror and say, I'm that different. Okay. Okay, we're at the end of the formal presentation. If you'll, in addition to, okay, you'll get the insert that will cover the last part of it with all the details. Any questions?
If you do have questions, you can put them in the chat box and we can ask Jerry about it. And as I mentioned, the big handout will be mailed out to you if we have your Eventbrite information in the chat box. Zoom will tend to give you your computer name or a name that it's seen on the when you've used Windows. So we need to make sure that we can send you and match up your email address with your real name. So please make sure you put that into the chat box, and then we can mail that. So if you have any questions, this has been a very informative program. You can put those in the chat box, and we can pass them on to Jerry. And otherwise, Jerry, you can add anything else that you wanted to say.
Okay, this is hard to do because remember, it's your body, and you obviously are seeking help because you have concern. As we get more and more information, one of the things that the Medicare was supposed to do was take all this information and put it all together so they could turn out and be sure that this treatment was effective for this problem. I've not seen anything where it worked out that way yet, but there is hope. So eventually we will see it. One of the problems is the electronic health records, one system does not talk to another system. So if you're going to Kaiser, you using their system, Kaiser can't talk to, say, Concentra, because Concentra uses a completely different system, and there's no common way of putting it together. Okay, anything else?
No, I think this is the type of a program that would be great for all of our computer clubs, since it tends to be older membership in our groups, besides being very entertaining. Thank you, Jerry.
Okay, wait, before you go,
okay,
and I've got
I'm
a few
minutes.
One more thing. And I didn't talk about it, the drug interactions. Most older people that have as little hair as I do and is no color in their hair are taking about 6 different drugs. Unless you buy all the drugs in one drugstore, then you have no way of knowing whether they're interacting with each other or whether you're getting the same drug under different names. My father-in-law was getting digitalis from 6 different doctors. They didn't talk to each other, and nobody knew, and so he felt awful because there was no one person that was overseeing it, nor did he check on the internet to find if there was drug interactions. So that's very important. And one of the websites is a site to crank in your drugs to see if they interact.
Yeah, well, and that kind of leads me to ask the question that may be the same kind of thing. I just now got a refill on a prescription that I've been taking, and got it through the mail order that I've been doing for years and years, because that's my package. And at different times, I've noticed, well, the pill changes color, changes shape, and there's a note on there, this pill may look different because we're getting it from a different supplier. Now, should that pill work the exact same way as the previous pill?
In theory, one of the classic things where the problem with generic or other providers was that one of the anti-seizure medicines, Dilantin, the patent ran out on it, so it was over the counter, and the over the counter medication tested the same, except something in the filler to make it the same size pill interfered with it, and so the people couldn't absorb it, so they started having seizures after not having seizures for years on the non-generic Dilantin, and they came up with, FDA said your drug has to have the same ingredients as the original, because the original was what was tested.